So to answer the question, the first claim I want to make is that the 1924 to 1926 Florida land boom was a major economic turning point to the US during this time period. To note, the land boom started as a result of Florida's economic boom, and the land boom was one of the causes of the Great Depression. Firstly, the land boom was an immense economic turning point to the US because Florida experienced an economic boom before the land crisis. Florida's economy surged after World War I, with the rise of tourism, drastic change in development and infrastructure, and a massive human migration in the beginning of the 1920s. Miami was ranked 9th in the country for infrastructure development with over 500 hotels, apartments, and houses under construction. By 1923, there was an estimated 47,000 inhabitants, which was an increase of 55% from 1920 in Florida. In 1924, the government also passed legislation on prohibiting inheritance and state income tax to attract more tourists, settlers, and investors. As proven, Florida's economy in the 1920s was booming, affecting migration, reconstruction, and even receiving political attention. Secondly, Florida's land boom and bust was a major economic turning point to the US because it served as a catalyst to the Great Depression. Florida's economic boom attracted an abundance of investors into the state, and with a striking increase in demand for land and properties. Soon after, in 1926, the housing market started to collapse for various reasons and affected the economy as a whole. Firstly, the media's portrayal of overpriced housing made a lasting impact and drove investors out of the city. For instance, Palm Beach Post criticized how the highest priced town in the world so far is getting dotted up is concerning. Also, the 1926 and 1928 hurricane destroyed over 13,000 properties and resulted in 155 deaths, and this was one of the main contributors to the land bust. This ended the housing demand in Florida, as shown in the photo on the right here. In 1929, Florida was under $35 million debt and was a financial burden to the economy, which then led to the Great Depression. Historian Paul S. George, who wrote the journal article Brokers, Binders, and Builders in 1986, would argue that the land boom was a financial devastation to Florida. He stated that the amount of individual and corporate financial ruin resulting from its collapse is incalculable. Consumers' purchasing power plummeted as they could not access basic services and needs, and George would argue that this change was dramatic as they went from a period of economic growth to a drastic shrink in their consumer spending. And this therefore proves how the land bust was a major economic turning point to the US. However, my counterclaim is that the 1924 to 1926 Florida land boom was not a dramatic economic turning point to the US compared to other factors. For example, the 1926 Florida smallpox outbreak was an unknown but significant factor to Florida's economy. The epidemic started in early January 1926 with information on the outbreak and case numbers intentionally disclosed to the public for the sake of protecting Florida's economy that had overflowed with tourists and investors during this time. However, this actually caused the outbreak to spread more rapidly to other cities such as Miami and Jacksonville, rather than Tampa. Historian Eric Jarvis, who was the writer of the journal article Secrecy Has No Excuse, released in 2011, describes how Florida was in controversy between those who focused primarily on physical health versus fiscal health. However, Jarvis argued how public health indirectly contributed to the health of the economy because the spread decreased tourism and consumption, and to note that consumer spending has the most impact on the country's GDP. Hence, Jarvis can argue that the small outbreak had a more drastic impact than the land boom. Lastly, another point to my counter-argument is that the land boom was only an indirect cause of the Great Depression. The land boom was not the main factor that caused the Great Depression. It was the stock market crash, where the market experienced a loss of 89.2%. Overall, compared to the stock market crash, the land bust was only a minor contributor to the Great Depression and the US economy as a whole. In conclusion to both my arguments, the 1926 Florida land boom and bust was an economic turning point to the US. Some historians may argue that it had a major impact, or some may argue that it only had a minor impact to the economy. To either extent, the Florida land bust lies as a historical economic turning point to the US. And this is my citations. Thank you.